Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, and it's just near midnight here. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. And so today's panel is about the transformation of the office, the impact of workplace design on well-being and mental health. And so it should be a great conversation. So if we can bring forward the panelists, please. So, good morning or evening, depending what time it is for you, Kevin and Tracy. Um, so welcome, and yeah, so looking forward to the conversation, and hope you are too. So, just to get us started, then, if you just briefly introduce yourself, and just let us know, what fascinates you about this topic. And start with Kevin.
Hi, Rod. Great to
Hey.
see you. Hi, Tracy. Good to see you. Kevin Mannion is my name. Late afternoon here in Dublin, Ireland. Glad we have an international panel here today. My most previous role was as a chief of staff at a company called Strava, and a site lead. So worked straddled across remote and hybrid and in office. I would definitely say I'm definitely not an expert in mental health and wellness. I would describe myself as an operational leader. I've worked across engineering, marketing, product, B2B, B2C. I'm currently working with companies, advising them on how to reduce their workplace friction. But yeah, really looking forward to the topic today, Rod, and I'll hand it over to Tracy.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Looking forward. Yeah, thanks, Rod. Looking forward to our conversation together. I'm Tracy Brower. I'm the Vice President of Workplace Insights for Steelcase. I write, I've got a couple of books. My most recent book is called The Secrets to Happiness at Work, and I write for Forbes and Fast Company. My PhD is in the sociology of work, so how we affect our work, how it affects us. And I've been around the world of HR for a couple of decades, working really, really closely on people processes, people issues, people solutions, and all of the, kind of future of talent in our organizations, and have worked for a couple of decades as well with organizations that focus on the workplace. And I think the workplace, the work experience more broadly, absolutely drives, catalyzes, nurtures, fosters well-being, mental health, and all of that. And I always like to think broadly about not just the workplace in terms of the stuff, right? The work surface or the chair, those matter. But then also, how do we create a more holistic work experience, which we as HR professionals have so much hand in and influence on. So looking forward to our conversation, you all.
Excellent. All right. So I guess to start to set the stage, and I'll start off with you, Kevin. Can you sort of describe, I guess, the state of well-being, mental health type in the workplace today that you experience? What's it like for you?
Yeah, Rod. I was thinking about this, and I think it's like the best of times and the worst of times. Like, look at all the flexibility we have. Some of us are in offices, some of us I'm here at home with my dog. We have managed to probably accelerate the workplace 10 years post-COVID with the amount of flexibility that we have. And most people are learning how to deal with that and how to create some boundaries in their time and, really just live and work their day around the day's work. So all of that is hugely positive. I think it's also the worst of times because we don't really know how to work in this way of working. I think there's a lot of people that are very unclear on now what's expected of them. I think there's a lot of people who just say yes to everything and don't know when to say no. And there's a lot of people who, maybe they have flexibility in terms of more autonomy to work when they work, but they are lacking that manager sitting across the hallway in the room who is there to help and guide them and help them understand what to prioritize. We haven't really replaced that. And I think that, for me, one thing that's, in these best of times, still driving a lot of frustration and burnout. And I think it's a big challenge for us to try to figure out.
Yeah, I love that, Kevin. Sorry, Ron, go ahead.
No, I was going to just say the same thing. I just thought, yeah, it is. I was at a friend's book launch this evening, and that was one of the individuals that I met at the launch was just talking about how at their work, they're now down to where you have to go into work 1 day a week. It's just such a different thing to think that's like the norm. It's quite varied. But over to you, Tracy. What are you going to add?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of, I love your best of times, worst of times, Kevin. I think that's just brilliant. I mean, the research suggests that our levels of well-being are lower today than they ever have been historically. Every single week, there's a new study that comes out on, challenges that people are having with mental health, and our levels of depression and anxiety are higher than they've ever been. Suicide is at one of its highest levels ever. People report, cognitive issues like their thoughts feel jumbled, or they're losing track of time. We all lose track of time, right? But we have real challenges right now with mental health. And the good news is that we have increasing awareness of those issues. But mental health issues are extraordinarily prominent right now, and people are reporting very low levels of well-being. And the really interesting thing is, if you look at the data, the younger the generation, the more likely people are to express mental health issues, well-being issues. There's one national, this is national, the things I've said so far are true globally. There's one national study within the US that suggests that 95% of Gen Zs report that they don't have a sense of well-being. Like, when was the last time you saw a survey on anything where 95% of people agreed, right? Like, that's just like earth shattering. So we feel really disconnected. We feel down. We feel like we're distant from each other. And there's beautiful research on happiness that suggests that even superficial interactions move the needle in terms of us feeling greater levels of happiness, joy, and well-being. So, but we don't talk to the barista anymore. We order on the app, right? We don't talk to the checkout person. We get the delivery at our door. And so that's important to us, because work is taking on an increasing role, an expanded role in terms of helping us to feel connected, right? Like somebody, whether I'm working virtually or face-to-face, somebody knows if I showed up today. I feel seen. I feel like I can make a contribution. You're waiting for that thing that I said I would do, right? There's talents that I'm bringing to the table in my work experience. And so I think that's a really important part of the landscape. Is work is upside down and inside out in terms of when, where, how, why we're working, with whom we're working. And it's a really important role that we have as HR professionals to create great experience that are not extractive of people, where we leave at the end of the day, literally or figuratively, and we feel totally sucked dry, right? If we can create work experiences that aren't extractive, but actually nourish and fulfill and create positive energy, that's a really, really important part of life for people. And so I think we have an even bigger responsibility in a good way in terms of affecting people's mental health and well-being.
Yeah, that's a lot you just went. I think you partly answered even the next question I was going to ask, and I was going to ask of you, which was really about why does the physical office environment contribute to mental health and well-being? And
yeah, I mean, and I think the really interesting thing is that the physical environments we're in, they send us such a message about how we fit and what our role is and what the culture is and what the values are of the organization, right? And there's a really nice model of organizational culture. Edgar Schein is a granddaddy of organizational culture, and he talked about an iceberg model, right? And under the surface of the water are norms and assumptions and values and all the things that you can't see but you can feel. And above the surface of the water are the things you can see that tell you something about the culture. And the place is such a signal to us. It sends us such cues, right? Like we walk in and I don't know, there's daylight and views, or there's the presence of metrics boards, which tell us that we value results. There's the presence of, I don't know, customer images or the products that we make, which remind us about our purpose. There's small rooms where we can get together, which remind us that, you know, we value building trust together. There's collaborative spaces that remind us that we value how we work together. There's great technology or great places for us to work independently, which tell us that the organization is valuing performance and supporting people in how we perform. So I love I love that first question, Rod, about, hey, you know, what does the physical office environment have to do with it? It brings us together. It creates those opportunities for purpose and connection. But more literally, it's sending us cues about what we value and how we work together in the ways that I just suggested. But Kevin, I'm sure you'll weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I was listening to you, Tracy, and I was thinking about, I was in an office, I was in London about 2 weeks ago, just meeting a friend, and I came to their office, and really big company, and the office at first glance was like perfect. You know, it had the foosball table one end, nobody using it, the pool table, it had the croissants, the coffee, and I remember thinking, like, what's missing here? You know, because it seemed pretty cool. You couldn't, you know, it probably was expensive. But one thing that I just listening to you talking there, I think I realized that was missing in that culture was the people. Nobody knew nobody knew anybody in there. It was ghosts walking around in and out of single rooms. So it just shows you, like, there's so much to it beyond just the physical infrastructure. I'm sure, Tracy, you're more of an expert than me, but like that to me was like a real missing piece of the jigsaws. We had all the stuff that money could buy, but there just didn't seem to be anybody who knew anybody in there, or who was in there every day, or, you know, anything.
Yes, exactly. There's a great quote from a brilliant designer, and it's something, I won't say it exactly right, but it's something like, you think the most interesting thing in the office is the furniture, but really the most interesting thing in the office is the people. And so I think the cool opportunity for us is, like, how do we activate spaces? How do we create experiences that bring people in, and then people will bring people in, right? Like, the reason I'm coming to the office isn't just because it's got, you know, great technology and, you know, nice views of the, you know, local area. It's because of the people that I'm working with. And so that's a really interesting and important element in terms of how we bring people together. The thing that's really interesting, if you look at the generational data, the popular narrative is, oh, Gen Zs are the ones who want to stay home all the time and just be on their devices. But actually, statistically, Gen Z is the #1 group that wants to be in the office, because they want to build their career, they want visibility, they want to build their social capital, they want mentoring. And so we all, mid-generations, tend to want to be in the office to get it done, right? Get in, get out, perform, go do the daycare dash, go do the elder care dash. Later generations tend to want to be there so that they can leave a legacy, so they can mentor, so they can coach. But it's, to your point, Kevin, right? It's all about the people. It's all about, like, feeling like I have a line of sight, literally or figuratively, to the people that I'm working with. So it's a great point.
You know, all those, I'll double click on all of that, and I think the other perspective, or maybe just adding a little bit, is just with the people and having, I guess, one thing I think is important, is that, and something to still work through, is that it's the people together. So it's that connection. that mutual trying to achieve something together, but working informally and formally together. So it's sort of, I mentioned a moment ago just about how one office, people need to go in one day a week. Well, if they all go different days, they probably don't get as much out of, working together in a physical office. It's really, I think, critical that one of the things that, some companies certainly here in Melbourne, Australia, need to focus at is to actually make an extra reason that people do come in an event, that they come in together, so that they actually can see each other, can interact together.
We've seen some great examples of that, Rod. I love that point. Like, organizations that do like meet the executives for all the people who started during COVID and haven't even met each other or their executives, or, getting people together from different regions, whatever. We've seen some really fun things in terms of like, if there's a stressful situation going on, bringing in the Humane Society and doing like puppy petting, right? Or we've had some really great examples where organizations have done like art fairs with employees who are artists, right? Like, this one might be playing a guitar in the corner and somebody over here is displaying their paintings and somebody over here is showing their sculptures. And we've had some other really nice examples of like gaming. So starting like gaming communities and then having a space where you can come and, do gaming or whatever. And so that activation of the space, those events that bring people together and have them start to feel, oh, I can get my sea legs again in terms of being out and about and in the office, and then getting to know people through those opportunities as well. It's amazing. We know food has power. We all know that. But there was some brand new academic research on when people eat together, they tend to feel higher levels of optimism and well-being. And of course, they feel like they're more bonded together. But it's just really, really interesting. Like there was actually academic research on the power of food. So let us come together and eat lunch, right?
Yeah, it works on me. I was going to say, I think the answer is definitely not, 10 Zoom calls locked in a room for the day that you're in the office. The opposite of that, whatever the opposite of that is.
Yeah. No, that's very true. And I think, the other point, like from a manager point of view, is that when the staff is in the office, if someone is having problems, if someone doesn't look right, like I've got more of an opportunity to identify that by them physically being there. I think it's easier to hide if you don't have, sometimes on a virtual call, if you're not putting your screen on, you might not pick up that someone's not, the way they normally are. You might not get the opportunity to talk to someone, that's on your team, whether it's your peer, your subordinate, or even your boss. Like you might pick up those signs. So physically being in the office can help sort of create that opportunity as well, sort of another point.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was there was some new, I know I'm always the research lady and so I'm a total nerd, but there was some research that 69% of people said their manager affected their mental health more than their doctor or their therapist, and on par with their partner. Like, as if leaders need one more level of pressure, right? But I love the point. Like, that's good news though too, right? Because leaders can have a really positive effect. But I love the point, Rod, that like if you're together, you can pick up those cues, you can see those cues, you can be attentive to each other, you can ask the question that in a way that doesn't require you to set up a call. You can just, just come up to somebody and be like, hey, how you doing, right? Like, how's it really going? And that level of empathy from being together, from attending to each other, from really being observant about how people are showing up. I think it's a critical part of that HR profession and leaders, and we can do that better when we're together.
Yeah, I was just thinking there, being together like that is a great way of, let's call it leading without having to lead. Nice. by just listening. And like, I just dread one-to-ones so much,
Oh, really?
yeah, you just one on and you've got this 30-minute slot to cover what they're doing, how they are personally, professionally, and they're just a box on the screen. And I remember a time when there was no one-to-ones, and you just knew because you were, well, and I guess it's finding the middle ground, but like, I definitely agree with you. Just like being there, having lunch, chatting is a great way to detect what's really going on and can be a lot less of a stressful environment than even a one-to-one with your boss, which I'm sure a lot of people don't actually look forward to in the week. Some do, some don't. I guess it depends on the relationship.
All right, so we might move on. Like we're going through 20 minutes already. It's pretty amazing. Now, conversely, then, so what are some ways that actually being physically in the office can detract from mental health or well-being? Like, is there some negatives, or that can impact it anyway? Who wants to give that one a start?
Do you want me to start that one, Kevin?
Yes.
Yeah, you go, Trey.
All right.
I'll riff off you.
Yeah. I mean, I think we still have offices, I think, where they haven't necessarily been designed for the way work has changed. Like work has changed, so the office should change as well. But sometimes the investment hasn't necessarily been made. So I think offices can detract from mental health when they don't provide the opportunity for us to connect with each other. Workforces grow and more and more and more and more and more people get put into the same facility, and there isn't room anymore for the community space or the informal space to connect or the collaboration space. And people really want that space as well as wanting private space. So that's one thing that I think can detract from well-being, is if we don't have those spaces that help us connect. I think another one is if we don't have enough privacy. Like if people just feel like they're in a bullpen and they can never get away to go off and make a phone call or go off and do, heads down work. If they're having a bad day and they just need to, take a break and have a, pull off on a rest area. So if there isn't enough privacy, that can also detract from mental health. I think another one is if it's too loud. We thrive on a low level of kind of noise around us, right? White noise around us. But it can be really distracting if we can understand too many voices around us and if it's loud. I think it can also be less helpful to mental health if it's like dark or dingy or dreary or hasn't been updated. So there are definitely companies that are investing in the experience of work. Oh, and another one is if we don't have the technological capability, right? So many more meetings have somebody who's remote or a video component or whatever, and we almost need more like phone booths or pods or little rooms where we can go and do a video call and not interrupt the people around us. That's what I mean by like the work has really shifted, and then the workplace needs to shift too. And if those shifts haven't been made toward all the things I mentioned, I think that can be really detracting from mental health, from well-being. But what would you say, Kevin?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think definitely the distraction factor. I think it's down to people. Like some people really thrive. They don't really mind if chaos around them, and they're happy, and they'll work and they might find a corner or whatever. But they would not wish to leave. And then there are people who just are not that and need the time and space. And even maybe pre-COVID would have taken the odd day. I know a guy who used to take a day off to work because he had I know it sounds crazy, but like he definitely did that because he needed like a few days or whatever to like focus on key problems. And so like I think that whole distraction factor for certain types of people is a big thing. And like, to be honest, if you're say doing a return to office mandate and someone is 90 minutes commute or something, like is that like both ways? Like, is there a payoff for dragging them in every week or 2 days a week? Like, it's kind of borderline at that stage. There's like, and stress with kids and everything. So I think there's definitely a balance to be had between the payoffs of having everyone together, but the stress it can also impose on a personal life. And it's not always the fact that, look, just get everybody in. It's fine for the Gen Z who's probably living around the corner, but like, if you're adding another hour and a half commute and something about kids, that's not going to make you too happy.
Yeah, it's got to be worth the commute, right? And it's actually really interesting because we're seeing this really the newest research on like you ask people how much do you want to be in the office, and then you ask leaders how much do you want people to be in the office, and we're seeing this intersection finally, this equilibrium happening where a large majority of people are happy to be in the office about 3 days a week. Give me choice, give me control. Choice and control are critical. It's lovely to maybe not put on my button pants and not do my commute, right? Maybe on a Monday or a Friday or a Thursday, Friday or a Monday, Tuesday, whatever, right? But a lot of people are really happy to be in the office a few days a week, and it's worth the commute on those 3 days a week. And a lot of leaders really want people to be in the office, but they're not all stuck on 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. A lot of leaders are really happy with about 3 days a week. So it's just really interesting that we've had this pendulum swing, right, with the pandemic and everything. And now maybe we're reaching this equilibrium of, yeah, I'd like to be in the office 3 days a week. Yeah, we'd like you to be in the office 3 days a week. And then if we can kind of help facilitate those team conversations, so the teams that work together are there on the same days, right, as much as possible, that makes a big deal too. Because if I'm going to show up, I want you to be there and you to be there, right? Because you're part of what makes my commute worth it.
Yeah. Now, I've been looking at the comments of, and there's comments that can be quite triggering. Some comments about a family member recently committing suicide, and I guess I'll just bring a bit of my own story in it. In that, I have a cousin actually who committed suicide about a month ago as well, and a big part of that was he was running his own business for himself, and just felt a lot of pressures around doing so, and just wasn't something that, again, that was totally visible, to the family. And then I've got another cousin who 3 or 4 years ago who committed suicide. Both of these cousins were in their 40s, and so for my cousin Adam, who committed suicide about 4 years ago now, he like, from a virtual sort of sense, like, you would just think he was the life of the party, and everything was really fantastic. And so, but that's what family were able to see, is this virtual, what he was putting out there visible for us to see. And that's not always, how someone is. And I guess this is going to obviously a fairly deep area, but we're talking about mental health, and the only way to deal with that is to talk about it. So I just bring it up for that reason. So I guess in both the cases that I spoke about from my circumstance, it's definitely been about individuals who have been working in isolation, and so the insights that maybe that Weir's family would get, we didn't get. So I don't know. Anyone got any thoughts about? Again, it's obviously a pretty tough thing to talk about, but something that should be spoken about. So I'll put that out there.
Yeah, I think it's great to put that out there. I think so many of us know somebody or struggle ourselves, and this is kind of to Kevin's point about best of times and worst of times. Like, I think the really positive thing is that we're talking more about it, right? We're putting stories out there. We're, asking people how they're doing. And I think sometimes it can be hard for HR professionals and leaders. Like, I don't know if I want to ask too many questions. I don't want to be intrusive. I'm not a social worker. But I think we benefit so much just by asking the question, and then, being ready to share resources, or, because most organizations have some resources, or communities have resources. And so I don't know that we can solve the issues ourselves, but if we can just be there and let people know that we're paying attention, that they're seen, that we value them, that we value, what they're going through in terms of their human experience, I think we send a message by demonstrating that empathy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Rod, and I'm really sorry for your loss. It's just a reminder. It's very easy not empathize with people, especially in the remote. You just never know, what's going on, and it's very easy to forget the human side of the people that you're working with across the workplace. And that was probably always the case. There was always some people who you didn't really gel with. It was a real minority of people, whereas now it could be a higher proportion of people that you can, in your mind, create. Maybe I'm not sure if this is off topic or not, but in your mind you can create this us versus them scenario. And like sometimes just a conversation is a valuable thing to have.
Yeah, I think I think that when we're just operating this virtual world, it's easy to make. So, well, for me, it's easy for me to make assumptions about how I'm perceiving someone, but I'm really making those assumptions on, a very small subset of information, and a small insight to what's actually happening in someone else's world. And I think when physically you get that opportunity to talk and you can then ask more questions, I think sometimes when we go into, and I guess I should be asking questions, but sometimes when you go into virtual calls, it's very easy just to go straight into business, and the whole like water cooler chit chat. I think that's possibly something that we miss out on, where you could sort of identify these little things. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like sometimes we tend to be in this world of hustle, right? Hustle culture. The more we're so busy and we have so many things going on, and we talk about how busy we are. And I think we can benefit by backing off on hustle culture to the best of our ability. And then going along with that, we're all about efficiency and effectiveness and being on task, right? And so but if we spend that time at the beginning of the meeting to just do the little chit chat and get to know each other, if we spend some time at the end of the meeting doing a little chit chat, if we're sometimes together in person and we can run into each other at the water cooler, run into each other at the coffee machine, check in, there's some really, really great research that suggests that when we know each other personally, we tend to follow up and follow through and complete tasks more effectively. We just feel a higher level of like obligation to each other. And it's kind of the magic of obligation and responsibility. And with more distance, like we're just on a screen, or we're just interacting on social media, or we're, just another name on the other side of an email, we may not feel as much accountability. Even if we're really great people who want to be accountable to each other, we may not feel the same level of accountability. But when we know each other more, when we have that level of personal connection, even if we're not BFFs, even if we're not sharing, too much information, TMI, just that opportunity to get to know each other personally can move the needle in terms of performance. What would you say about that, Kevin?
I have a slightly, just to don't want to prematurely lighten the mood, I have a slightly funny story. A friend of mine was telling me they were in a call like this, and there was maybe 6 or 7 people, and someone decided to have an icebreaker, which is, textbook stuff for lightning, getting to know each other. So they said, right, what Netflix series are you watching? So the first person's, I'm not au fait with what's on Netflix right now, but like the first person says, I'm watching this, and they explain the whole thing. And my friend was thinking, what would she say? Okay, she said, okay, I'm watching this show, blah, 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 explains how it's all about. Goes on 2 more, and then the 5th person comes in. Oh, I'm watching this show, and it was the exact same show as my friend, because she was so busy thinking about which show to talk about that she wasn't listening to anything that anybody had said. So maybe it's training we all need. Junior, more senior is listening. Even now, right? You're talking on something like this, and you're almost thinking like, what let's say next, but you're also trying to listen, and you're picking up the wisdom. But it's definitely a skill that's probably way more necessary now than in the past.
Now, I'm not sure if I already asked this question or that. So what are some ways the office detracts from our mental health?
Did we do that one? I think is that.
I think we've done
that. I think that was
That was
I would go back to some of my comments about, like when there isn't space to collaborate, when there isn't privacy, when there isn't, when it's too loud, when it's too distracting, if it's dark, if the people that you want to work with aren't there that day, all those things can be detracting from mental health.
Yeah, I guess I know that, like, from my personal experience as well, it's now I've sort of got these new routines, like how I take the kids to school, or there's things that are part of life that sort of expanded, I think, that they're the balances as well. So whereas I know the way that I operated before, that like it was just work, I think. So it's quite a different environment now.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And now, so all right, so we'll move on. So considering, I guess, the hybrid way, so now, like, often now you can find that you got half the team are in the office and the other half are spread out working at home or working somewhere else. How does that set up? How does that help employee or hinder employee well-being and mental health? What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Yeah, well, like, this is where the rule book goes out the window, and you're really starting from scratch. You are combining all the different scenarios. Some people are in the office. There's someone on Zoom. Does everybody look at the same screen? Does everyone have their own screen? Then you've got the day in the office. Are we all just going to carry on with our own work? Are we going to do something to collaborate? Is that a distraction from the work we're supposed to be doing? So I think, every leader and manager needs to consider themselves like an architect, and there's a green field, and they really need to be purposeful about what they're building and how they build around where their team is, and when they're going to be in and when they're going to be out, and what those unique permutations are, and ultimately have to make it work for the people that you have, and like figure out what that calendar really looks like. I think it's really, really challenging, because I'm not sure I know of a rule book for it. And teams are used to finding their own ways of working and norms, but it's definitely hard to prescribe it, especially when you've got so many versions of who's where.
No, I think that's a great point, like, of who's where, like, because maybe the manager is actually the one who's working at home, and you've got all the
100%.
team in the office. Or it could be a generational thing. I mean, Tracy, you brought up generational before. It could be, all the younger ones who are really keen on being mentored are in the office. And in fact, in my office, we actually had that. We hired 20 graduates, and they were in the office 5 days a week. But could we get anyone else in? It was very difficult. So those different models, like those setups, it's just how do you work that to be most effective for the organization and for the individuals, and I guess making the team and the individuals feel like they belong again. I think belonging is such an important element to all this.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like, talking about remote and hybrid work, the research suggests that it's here to stay. Like there's no world where we're going back to Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. That's not going to be happening. But the really interesting thing, I think, is with like hybrid and remote work, I think we need to really develop leaders to potentially lead differently, right? To lead from a distance, to motivate from a distance, to manage morale, to be able to check in with people and be empathetic, even if you don't see them so much. I think we need to, so that's part of it, is like, what's the new way that we have skills to relate to each other in hybrid work and remote work? I think another thing we need to kind of move toward to be successful with hybrid and remote work is being really, really clear about expectations and performance deliverables. The best leaders, the best organizations have always been the one who can lead from a distance and lead by objectives and not necessarily just be, looking for the whites of people's eyes. But now that is even more important. So there's definitely a leadership and a cultural component in terms of how we move in that direction. And I think another thing we need to do in order to make hybrid and remote work is to be really clear about boundaries and guardrails. Like there's a lot of organizations who have just tried to be Wild West, like, hey, come when you want, come whenever you want, right? And sometimes people don't. And I think people really appreciate some guardrails. Like, hey, these two teams work together. We're going to be in the office together on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Outside of that, go ahead, flex. Also, you're a grown-up. If you have something on a Tuesday afternoon, go do your Tuesday afternoon thing. But when we can give people some of those guardrails, so they're not reinventing their day every day, they're not thinking logistically every day about who am I meeting with and who's going to be there and should I make my commute and am I going to drop off the kids on the way or am I working from home, right? So that those boundaries, those guardrails actually are quite liberating for people because they just set up routines that help us to be more efficient in our personal lives. We can offload some of that mental process of managing logistics because we just know Tuesdays and Wednesdays are our day in the office. So I think that's another thing that we can think about in order to create successful work environments and think about well-being and mental health, give people those routines, give people those boundaries, which help us to feel like we know what to expect.
Yeah. I wonder with the hybrid, what your thoughts are about when the group that are in the office, they may get the more subtle messages about what's the purpose, what are we trying, what are our priorities this week? Maybe there's not the same intentionality about communicating that with the whole team, how and so some people may feel like they aren't fully belonging in the team. How do they they're not being included in everything? How do you manage that sort of how do you actually help the people who are working remotely feel like they do belong and that they're not being excluded intentionally? Because they're probably not being intentionally excluded, but they may perceive that, and that may impact, their well-being and mental health. What are your thoughts on that?
Another really significant challenge, I think, CEO, I suppose it kind of is on the CEO or whoever that, maybe departmental leader or whoever that figurehead is, to humanize probably their communication a lot more. Who would imagine that you would work for a company and never see the senior, potentially never or rarely see the senior leaders and never get a sense for what's driving them as people and as leaders. So that is a big challenge for any for organization of a significant size where you have a leader and communicating what their mission is, because it's in them. Sometimes they might need some help or some coaching to get it out, and they might need to just pull up the phone on FaceTime in the morning and make a video and stick it into your Microsoft Teams or your Slack or something. But that is something that is, I guess, a whole job in itself, is getting the message and the purpose out of the CEO. And then it puts a ton of effort, a ton of workload. Managers are the real people who've taken on a lot more, in order to kind of communicate that purpose, reiterate that purpose, because a lot of the time what you'll have is offsites and things, but it might be that a certain level gets to go with the offsite or an extended leadership team. So then you're coming back to your front line and you're trying to communicate everything that was said there. That's a huge additional thing you kind of have to do. And you put that on top of, Tracy was talking about boundaries. I like a huge job of management is decluttering the stuff people are doing. It's just to try to shake off some of this workload that is kind of organically just got attached. To doing that remotely is hard. And then, inclusion, we all feel left out the minute there is a group created, meeting happening, that some some group that you consider yourself a peer of, and all of a sudden you're not. So that heightened awareness, it really creates and I suppose I'm just even building this up as I'm talking, it's such an amount of workload and cognitive load for a middle manager to have to know how to do stuff.
Yeah, as you're talking there, I think also another dimension is just the perception of trust. And it's two-way maybe. How am I trusted working remotely? Do I feel like that? Like if you're using, some people use Skype for their messaging, and it tells you how many minutes ago you were touching the keyboard. Do I need to be somehow touching the keyboard all the time? Because no one trusts that I'm actually working.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that point about belonging is so important too. Like, how do you create a sense of belonging from a distance? And one of the things we know about belonging is you don't get a sense of belonging just from being with other people. You get a sense of belonging when you have a shared sense of social identity. So I love your point, Kevin, about, purpose and leaders who are reinforcing purpose. Like if we have a shared identity, even if we're not working face to face in the office, that helps us with a sense of belonging. And, to your point, Rod, if we're staying in touch on Skype or staying in touch somehow, right, that's a big deal, because that continuity of the relationship, that consistency and communication can be really helpful for trust building. I think another thing we can do to kind of involve people is this is going to sound so mechanical, but even just like etiquette in meetings, right? Because it's so hard to be a remote participant when there's people in a room together. And we have to think about I like to think about presence equity. Like, how do we, make sure that we're involving them in the conversation that's going on before the meeting? How do we make sure that we're writing something on the whiteboard and someone in the meeting is taking a picture and texting it to the person so they can see it? It sounds really dumb, but how do we make sure the acoustics are good enough so we're not eating chips next to the speakerphone, right? Or we pause in the meeting and ask that remote participant to speak up, or, hey, what are your thoughts? All those kinds of things that can feel really mechanical, but it's also helpful to kind of remind ourselves about. I think the other thing we can do, and this is building on your point as well, Kevin, is invite people into projects, invite people into cross-functional work. A lot of times the people within our team know us, even if we're working at a distance, because we see each other at the work team meeting or we see each other on the call. But if we can, as leaders and HR professionals, give people opportunities to connect in projects that may be outside of their immediate swim lane, they're still relevant, they're still adding value, they're still really good business decisions to include those people. Having them get involved in more of those things, I think, is a big deal. And then I think the more we can also do things outside of work together as well. Like, we want to involve people in the task stuff, but then also involve them in some of the relationship stuff. So make sure that we're, when we go do our Habitat for Humanity build as a team, or we go work in the community garden as a team, we make sure that the date works for the remote participants as well.
Yeah.
No, some really good points there, Tracy. I think the point around having a group in the office and then how do you include the people that are remote in the actual meeting, it's pretty critical these days to be very intentional about how you do that. And certainly, like a lot of my experience has been working in the IT sector, where we would have a lot of our workforce traditionally, even prior to the sort of COVID type times, would be operating out of somewhere like India. A lot of the technical staff would be there, and we'd have other staff that are dealing with the customer in the office. And I don't think like reflecting, I don't think that, I was inclusive of the people remote, as well as I could have been then. I think now, like intentionally, like some things that I try to make sure is that, we set up one of the computers. Uh, it's just facing the whiteboard, like it's doing nothing other than facing the whiteboard. So
Mm.
that's a way
Good idea.
to bring people in. They can look at one screen and they can see it's on the whiteboard. Just there's other little sort of tactics, I guess, that you can try to do to incorporate, making it more inclusive for everybody that's part of the work.
Yeah.
Wow, we've only got 10 minutes left. This is crazy, and I have wrote out all these
Get
questions.
started.
We've got nowhere near through it. Now, Tracy, something that and you've already mentioned some of it is you're writing to evidence and studies, and I'm just wondering, evidence and studies that about the office environment. What can you share with some evidence?
Yeah, there's some really, really interesting. There's an academic study about engagement. When we are working side by side, face to face with people who are super engaged, there's a spillover effect. So we tend to feel more engaged, which is about feeling a sense of energy, feeling immersed, feeling like we matter, right? So that engagement, there's literally evidence of that spillover effect. There's also some really interesting evidence of productivity and performance when we're working side by side with people who are performing really well and kind of really, really rolling up sleeves and getting it done. That tends to have a positive spillover effect as well, which is pretty cool. There's also some really interesting research on learning. And when we're together in the trenches, that is when we learn most deeply. Like we tend to embed our learning more deeply when we're working side by side with someone on a task, as opposed to when we're sitting in a classroom. All kinds of learning are helpful to us, and a variety of learning is helpful, but learning side by side on a task embeds the learning more deeply. And this is super interesting. When we are surprised by something, when we're curious about something, we get a dopamine hit in our brain, which is that feel-good chemical that like makes us want more of it. And so neurologically, when we're together with others and we're like, oh, that's cool, I wouldn't have thought of that, or oh my gosh, you totally turned me on to something that I was backward on, that can be really helpful in terms of our brain chemistry and our positive experiences, not just in a sort of ethereal way, but in a way that's proven through research. So those are some of the things that we know.
Yeah, I was just thinking. Sorry, I was just thinking. Decisions people have to make, for example, are okay when we have in-person time or when we have off-site time or off-site, on-site, whatever you want to call it, time. What do we do? And I just think there is a lot to be said for not that just being like fun and say, social activity, but for, problem solving together, can drive a lot of team bonding. It can seem, hey, we're bringing you through work, but a lot of the time that can be the types of things that you get a lot of fulfillment out of. So just a thought based on what you were saying there, Tracy.
All right. So the next question I'd like to just explore is, well, from your perspective, I guess from both Tracy and Kevin, I guess what would you see as, here and now be sort of the best practice for incorporating well-being into office design? How do you see it? Who wants to go? Do you want to go first, Tracy?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
I think best practice for office design is to make sure that offices are flexible, so that people can affect the office, right? They can pull over the whiteboard, they can put their desks together, that kind of thing. That's kind of the micro level of flexibility. But I think the macro level of flexibility is having enough variety that people can go do different work in different places. If I want to be heads down, I can go to an enclave. If I want to collaborate, if I can go to a collaboration space. If I want to be, with other people, but I still have work to do on my laptop, I can go to the cafe or whatever, the cafeteria, and have that community space. So one best practice is flexibility and choice and control. I think another best practice is more spaces emphasizing community and collaboration proportionally. If we have the opportunity to make those changes, a lot of the reason people are coming to the office is for those connections, even in the case of introverts. A third best practice is to make sure that we have privacy for people, places where they can get away. It may not be a dedicated private office, but it's at least a spot that I can go and get away, maybe close a door, maybe just be away a little bit. Another best practice from a well-being standpoint is giving people what they need to perform well, because when we perform well, that influences our level of esteem. So I've got tools, I've got technology, I've got the spaces that work for me, I've got, places that I can choose. So performance is another. And then another is just places for well-being. Like we know that daylight and views matter. We know that literally plants in the environment matter. There's academic research on that. Places that are like nursing rooms for new moms or napping pods, especially for people who might be working across time zones. Places where people can just get away and, have a minute to kind of take a deep breath. Those kinds of spaces are really important in terms of well-being. And then, of course, best practice is making sure that we're focusing on the culture as a whole, because you can have the most brilliant physical environment in the world, but have a terrible culture, and the physical environment is not going to be enough. So I think we always need to be paying attention to culture. But what would you say, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's probably 90% culture, or let's call it 80. But I was thinking there, I think even someone kitting out an office now, there's almost like two competing things. There's like, how can we make this look so cool that people want to go? Versus what does this thing need to serve? And, there's probably, in my personal opinion, longer term gains out of taking it from what's the function, like how does this facilitate us as let's call us a hybrid organization? Like Rod says, you've got the camera on the whiteboard, you have the space for team problem solving, you have the quiet space that someone's going to need. So definitely very complex, obviously. I think I would think about it as almost workplace design rather than office design, and encompass all the moving parts. And look, the fuzzball tables and all will kind of make it look good when you're showing someone around. Maybe you're trying to hire them and it looks good, but thinking about the long-term function of the office and how that reflects how you want to run your business is, I think, the best starting point.
All right, we've got big 2 minutes left. It's like, I can't believe how fast this has gone. So I just, for both of you, is there any sort of final thoughts you'd like to share on how we can create a more supportive and healthy work environment?
I would just say that we want to be really intentional about it, right? Like we want to think about tools and spaces, but we also need to think about process and culture, and really make the business needs true north, make the people needs true north, and know that as HR professionals, we can have a huge impact on it when we're intentional about doing our best, right? We're not going to solve all the things. We're not going to be able to make huge investments, but if we can do a couple of things that affect the work experience more holistically, I think we can absolutely empower ourselves to make a huge impact.
Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah.
And Kevin?
I could probably open up another hour-long webinar, but I think to me, the work experience is the team experience. So like these different teams, how are they gelling, and how do they how can you create something that works for each of them? I think is maybe just one last thought in terms of designing your workplace.
No, I think that could be a whole topic in itself, because I think that I've probably spent a lot of the time having one-on-ones with individuals, but how's that change happening across individual is probably a bit blind to, but have to be another topic, because we're now at the hour. But so thank you so much, Tracy and Kevin. It's been a very fast hour. It's really fascinating topic. I look forward to future panels with you, and thanks for everyone who's listening in today. So thank you and goodbye. And so have a good night or morning.
Good night. Good morning.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Great talking to you all. Bye-bye.